A story of courage, determination, and breaking barriers. In the spring of 1942, a young woman named Grace Sullivan stood outside the Naval Recruiting Office in Brooklyn, New York. She wore her Sunday best, a floral dress with small white buttons down the front, her mother's pearl necklace, and carefully polished shoes. Her hair was pinned back neatly, and she carried a small purse containing her identification papers and a letter of recommendation from her high school principal. Grace was 22 years old, fresh out of secretarial school, and determined to serve her country. The world was at war, and she felt a burning desire to contribute something meaningful to the war effort. But when she walked through those heavy doors into the recruiting office, she had no idea that her journey would begin with mockery and end with her name written in the history books. The day everything changed. The recruiting office was bustling with activity. Young men lined up in their casual clothes, work pants, button-down shirts, some still wearing their factory uniforms. They chatted nervously amongst themselves, smoking cigarettes and discussing which branch of service they hoped to join. When Grace entered the room, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Heads turned. Some men smiled politely, others looked confused, and a few chuckled under their breath. Grace walked straight to the desk where a stern-looking Navy recruiter sat, shuffling through papers. His nameplate read, Chief Petty Officer Morrison. Without looking up, he barked, "Ma'am, the Red Cross volunteers meet down the street on Thursdays." "I'm not here for the Red Cross," Grace said firmly. "I'm here to enlist." Chief Morrison finally looked up, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. He took in the floral dress, the pearls, the polished shoes. A slow smile spread across his face, but it wasn't a kind one. "Enlist? In the Navy? Young lady, I think you're confused about what we do here." Behind her, Grace heard snickers from some of the men waiting in line. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she stood her ground. "I'm not confused, sir. President Roosevelt signed the bill allowing women to serve. I want to join the Waves." The Waves, women accepted for volunteer emergency service, had been established just months earlier in July 1942. It was a groundbreaking program that allowed women to serve in the United States Navy for the first time in history, though not in combat roles. Grace had read about it in the newspapers and had been counting down the days until she was old enough to apply. Chief Morrison leaned back in his chair, still smiling that condescending smile. "The Waves? Well, aren't you precious? Tell me, sweetheart, what exactly do you think you can do for the Navy in that pretty little dress? Are you planning to dance for the sailors?" The room erupted in laughter. Some of the men waiting in line doubled over, slapping their knees. Grace felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had grown up with 3 older brothers who had taught her never to show weakness, especially when someone was trying to break you down. "I graduated top of my class in stenography and typing. I'm 90 words per minute. I'm fluent in French, and I have excellent mathematical skills. The Navy needs administrators, communication specialists, and code workers. I can do any of those jobs, and I can do them well." Chief Morrison's smile faded slightly. He looked at her again, this time with something that might have been grudging respect. "Those are fine skills, Miss Sullivan?" "Grace Sullivan." "Miss Sullivan, but the Waves program is serious business. It's not a social club. You'll be working long hours, following strict military protocols, living in barracks, taking orders from superior officers. You really think you can handle that?" Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Yes, sir. I know I can." The chief sighed and pulled out a stack of forms. "All right then. Fill these out. And Miss Sullivan, if you're accepted, and that's a big if, nobody's going to care what you're wearing, they're going to care about what you can do. Boot camp and beyond." 6 weeks later, Grace received her acceptance letter. She would report to the U.S. Naval Training School in the Bronx for basic training. Her mother cried when she told her the news, partly from pride, partly from fear. Her father, a World War I veteran who had lost his right arm in the trenches of France, simply nodded and said, "Do us proud, Gracie." Boot camp was nothing like Grace had imagined. She had expected discipline and hard work, but she hadn't anticipated how difficult it would be. The physical training pushed her body to its limits. She learned to march in formation, to salute properly, to make her bunk so tight that a quarter would bounce off it. She studied naval history, military protocol, and communications procedures. But the hardest part wasn't the physical challenges or the academic rigor. It was the constant doubt from others. Some of the male officers treated the Waves recruits like they were playing dress-up in real military uniforms. They would make comments like, "Don't worry, ladies, we'll go easy on you," or "Try not to break a nail during inspection." Grace learned to ignore the condescension. She focused on her work, excelled in her studies, and graduated near the top of her training class. She was assigned to the Office of Naval Communications in Washington, D.C., where she would work as a cryptographic technician, one of the women responsible for encoding and decoding secret military messages. It wasn't glamorous work. Grace spent 12 to 14 hours a day in a windowless room, hunched over cipher machines and code books, translating intercepted enemy communications. The work was tedious, mentally exhausting, and absolutely critical to the war effort. Every decoded message could mean the difference between a successful military operation and a devastating loss of life. The breakthrough that changed everything. In the autumn of 1943, Grace was working the night shift when something unusual crossed her desk. It was a Japanese naval communication that had been partially decoded by another analyst. Most of it seemed routine: supply requisitions, weather reports, standard operational chatter. But Grace noticed something odd in the message structure. There was a sequence of numbers that didn't follow the usual pattern. It was subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying very close attention. Grace had been working with Japanese naval codes for over a year, and she had developed an almost intuitive sense for when something was off. She spent the next 6 hours working on that single message, trying different cipher keys, cross-referencing with previous communications, looking for patterns. Her supervisor told her to move on to other work, but Grace couldn't let it go. Something in her gut told her this was important. Finally, at 4 in the morning, the message revealed itself. It was a coded Japanese naval communication about a major Japanese naval operation planned for the Philippine Sea. The message contained coordinates, dates, and fleet movements. It was intelligence gold. Grace immediately brought her findings to her commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander Robert Hayes. He was skeptical at first. The message seemed too good to be true, and it had come from such an unlikely source. A young Waves recruit, barely a year into her service, claiming to have cracked a high-level Japanese communication that more experienced analysts had missed? But Hayes was a good officer. He didn't dismiss Grace's work because of her age or gender. He reviewed her analysis carefully, checked her methodology, and consulted with other cryptographic experts. Within hours, they confirmed that Grace's decryption was accurate. The intelligence was immediately forwarded to the Pacific Fleet Command. It played a crucial role in what would become known as the Battle of the Philippine Sea, one of the largest carrier battles of World War II. American forces, forewarned about Japanese plans, were able to position their fleet advantageously. The battle resulted in a decisive American victory with minimal U.S. losses and catastrophic Japanese casualties. Grace's contribution was classified top secret. She couldn't tell her family, her friends, or anyone outside of her immediate work group about what she had accomplished. She received a commendation that would remain in a sealed file for decades. But her commanding officers knew, the intelligence community knew, and her reputation as an exceptional cryptographic analyst was sealed. Rising through the ranks. After the war ended in 1945, many women were encouraged or pressured to leave their wartime jobs and return to traditional domestic roles. The WAVES program was scheduled to be disbanded, but Grace had proven herself too valuable. She was asked to stay on as a civilian analyst for the newly formed Armed Forces Security Agency, the predecessor to the National Security Agency. Grace continued her work throughout the Cold War. She helped crack Soviet communications during the Berlin airlift. She trained new generations of cryptographers. She developed new techniques for signals intelligence that are still in use today. She eventually rose to become one of the highest-ranking civilian analysts in the intelligence community. But Grace never forgot that day in the Brooklyn recruiting office. She never forgot the laughter, the condescension, the assumption that she couldn't contribute simply because she wore a floral dress instead of work pants. And she made it her mission to ensure that other women wouldn't face the same barriers she had. Throughout her career, Grace mentored hundreds of young women entering the intelligence field. She advocated for equal opportunities, equal pay, and equal recognition. When she attended intelligence conferences, she would often be the only woman in the room. But she never let that silence her voice. She spoke up, she challenged outdated thinking, and she proved through her actions that competence has no gender. Recognition at last. For most of her life, Grace's contributions remained classified. She lived quietly, never seeking publicity or recognition. She married another intelligence analyst named Thomas Jen in 1952, and they had 2 daughters. Her family knew she worked for the government doing something important with codes, but the specifics remained secret. It wasn't until 2003, nearly 60 years after that crucial night in Washington, that Grace's wartime accomplishments were declassified. A historian researching the Battle of the Philippine Sea discovered her name in archived documents and began piecing together her story. When the full extent of her contributions became known, the intelligence community was stunned. Here was a genuine war hero whose story had been hidden in classified files for decades. In 2005, at the age of 85, Grace was invited to the White House to receive the Presidential Citizens Medal. The ceremony was attended by military leaders, intelligence officials, and representatives from the WAVES Veterans Association. When the citation was read aloud, describing how her cryptographic work had saved thousands of American lives and contributed to the Allied victory in the Pacific, Grace wept quietly. In her brief acceptance speech, she said something that everyone in attendance would remember. "When I walked into that recruiting office in 1942, they laughed at my dress. They thought I was too delicate, too feminine, too unsuited for serious work. But I wasn't there to show them my clothes. I was there to show them my capabilities. And that's what I did every single day for the rest of my career." Grace passed away in 2008 at the age of 88. Her funeral was held at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. Former colleagues from the intelligence community spoke about her brilliance, her dedication, and her kindness. Her daughters shared stories about a mother who could crack enemy codes, but still made time to help with homework and attend school plays. The chief of the Naval Security Group gave a eulogy that concluded with these words: "Grace Sullivan Chen taught us that heroism isn't about what you wear or how you look. It's about what you do when the moment calls. It's about having the courage to walk through doors that others say should remain closed. It's about proving your worth not just once, but every single day." The Navy laughed at her dress in 1942, but by 1943, we weren't laughing anymore. We were learning from her, we were relying on her, and because of her work, countless sailors came home to their families. The legacy lives on. Today, women serve in every branch of the United States military, including in combat roles that would have been unthinkable in Grace's time. The Naval Academy admits women on equal terms with men. Women command ships, fly fighter jets, serve as Navy SEALs, and hold positions at every level of military leadership. This progress didn't happen automatically. It happened because women like Grace Sullivan Chen proved their worth despite the barriers placed in their way. It happened because they refused to accept that their gender made them less capable. It happened because they walked into recruiting offices wearing floral dresses and pearl necklaces and said, "I can serve my country too." Grace's story reminds us that heroes don't always look the way we expect them to. They don't always arrive in the approved uniform, speaking the expected language, fitting neatly into traditional categories. Sometimes they show up in a Sunday dress, determined to contribute, ready to prove that capability matters more than appearance. The recruiting office where Grace first enlisted no longer stands. It was torn down decades ago to make way for modern development, but there is now a small plaque on the building that replaced it, which reads, "Near this site, Grace Sullivan enlisted in the U.S. Navy Waves in 1942. She went on to become one of America's most accomplished cryptographers, contributing significantly to Allied victory in World War II. Her courage opened doors for generations of women in military service." Every year, new recruits from the Brooklyn area receive a booklet during their orientation that includes Grace's story. They learn about the woman who faced mockery and proved her critics wrong through dedication, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to serving her country. Grace's two daughters, now in their 70s, often speak at military academies and intelligence training facilities. They share stories about their mother, not just the war hero, but the woman who loved mystery novels, who made terrible pancakes, who sang off-key in the car, who cried during sad movies. They remind young people that heroes are human, that they have fears and doubts and bad days just like everyone else. What makes them heroes is that they keep going anyway. What we can learn today. Grace Sullivan Chen's story isn't just a piece of military history. It's a reminder that we all face moments when others doubt our capabilities, when doors seem closed, when our appearance or background or circumstances make others dismiss us before we've had a chance to prove ourselves. In those moments, we have a choice. We can let the laughter, the dismissal, the condescension turn us away. Or we can do what Grace did. Stand firm, state our qualifications, and demand the opportunity to show what we can do. Grace didn't change people's minds with arguments or angry confrontations. She changed them through consistent excellence. She showed up every day and did her job better than almost anyone else. She didn't let the doubters distract her from her mission. She focused on the work, on the contribution, on the goal. Her story also reminds us to question our own assumptions. How often do we dismiss someone's potential based on superficial factors? How often do we assume that someone can't do something because they don't look like our mental image of what a competent person in that role should look like? Chief Petty Officer Morrison, the recruiter who initially mocked Grace, later became one of her strongest advocates. After the war, he would tell anyone who would listen about the young woman in the floral dress who became one of the finest cryptographers in the Navy. He learned his lesson, and his story reminds us that we can all grow beyond our prejudices if we're willing to let people's actions speak for themselves. Your journey starts now. Grace Sullivan Chen's journey from that Brooklyn recruiting office to the halls of the White House spans decades. But it began with a single moment of courage. One decision to walk through a door despite the laughter. One choice to believe in her own abilities when others didn't. What door are you standing in front of today? What goal seems just out of reach? What voice in your head or in the world around you is telling you that you can't do something because of who you are, what you look like, or where you come from? Grace's story tells us that those voices are wrong. Your capability isn't determined by others' expectations. Your potential isn't limited by their lack of imagination. Your worth isn't defined by their prejudices. So wear your floral dress if you want to. Show up as your authentic self. Walk through those doors with confidence. And then, like Grace, prove your worth through the quality of your work and the strength of your character. The world needs more people who refuse to accept artificial limitations. The world needs more people who see barriers as challenges to overcome, rather than reasons to give up. The world needs more heroes who don't look like this stereotypical image of a hero. The world needs you. If Grace Sullivan Chen's story inspired you, don't let it end here. Hit that like button to honor her memory and the memory of all the women who served in silence, whose contributions went unrecognized for decades. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories of courage, determination, and ordinary people who did extraordinary things. We share these forgotten histories every week because these stories deserve to be remembered. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Maybe it's a young woman considering a career in a male-dominated field. Maybe it's a friend facing discrimination. Maybe it's someone who just needs a reminder that their potential isn't defined by others' expectations. And leave a comment below telling us, what door are you going to walk through? What barrier are you going to break? What would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? Grace Sullivan Chen didn't let laughter stop her from changing history. What will you do? Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. These histories matter. These people mattered. And their courage can inspire us all to be better, to do more, and to never accept that we're less than what we know we can be. Thank you for watching. And remember, heroes don't always look the way we expect. Sometimes they show up in a floral dress ready to change the world.